Welcome to the McFeely Mess podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
It is time for another edition of the McFeely Mess podcast at Inforum.com. Welcome to all of you faithful listeners as the pod has made a return in 2024. We've had some nice listenership numbers and lots of nice feedback from those who do listen, including a face-to-face compliment while I was in Grand Forks from one Rich McFarland, who said he actually listened to this podcast while walking his dog. And so, Rich, as I said in Grand Forks to you, I'm sorry that your life has come to that you listen to my podcast while you're walking your dog. That's kind of a sad commentary on your life. No offense, of course, but we do appreciate all of the listeners that we have, and we always appreciate feedback to this podcast. So go ahead and shoot me a Twitter message or an email or a phone call, and we'll be happy to respond to whatever it is that you want to hear on the pod. This week's edition is a little bit different than our previous ones. We kind of got into some newsy stuff and some politics, and we brought in a couple of female voices in Tracy Briggs and Tammy Swift because I was told by listeners that they want to hear some female voices. But this week we're kind of doing some of the old McFeely Mess stuff, and that's talking some sports, and specifically some Bison and Bison football, even more specifically. And I want to welcome into the podcast Eric Peterson, a fellow sportswriter, longtime friend here at the Forum of Fargo Moorhead. Welcome back to the pod.
Thanks. Well, why are we even doing this if you think it's bad that people are listening to your podcast? Like they have no life if they're listening to it. That isn't exactly, that's not selling people on listening to this.
Rich and I are fine. Rich and I have been long Twitter messengers, and he's one of the guys who put me onto the story of, oh gosh, I can't remember the kid's name now, but the guy who lost a bet in his fantasy football league, and the punishment for losing his fantasy football league was coming to Fargo.
Yep.
Rich was one of the guys who put me into that story, and I turned it into a nice little story that got some heat on the interwebs. And so Rich and I have been kind of stayed in contact since then. And because he gave me the tip on that story, I actually told him at the time I would buy him a beer whenever he was in Fargo. And I have not yet done that. Collins Moe. You just found it on your phone. Collins Moe. Collins, I apologize to you. I just couldn't remember your name. But I owe Rich a beer or two. And so when he saw me in Grand Forks at the NDSU UND basketball games, he wanted to remind me, number one, that I owed him beers. And then number two, wanted to tell me that he listens to my podcast and he's glad that it's back. So we're fine. Okay. Rich and I are fine. Wanted to have you in today because there's been some stuff happening. Bison football season never ends anymore. And also, Kolpak's on vacation. And so him and Dom, I don't think, are going to do their podcast this week. And so I thought you and I could kind of return to the days of the JV podcast and sort of cover some of the stuff that's going on. A couple of things this week. Let's start with what happened today. We're recording this on Wednesday, February 7th. And so today, North Dakota State announced officially that it had signed 4 more football players in what we call the late signing period. It's actually, I think, the regular signing period, and the one in December is the early signing period. But they signed 4 more football players, 3 of whom we knew about ahead of time. The 4th one, a quarterback, Jacob Kilzer from Maple Grove. That one was kind of kept under the radar a little bit, and we could talk about that. But 4 more football players signed, 2 transfers in an offensive lineman, Trent Fraley, a transfer from Marshall, and then this Kilzer kid from Maple Grove who was from Air Force, and then 2 walk-ons that you wrote about from Eagan, Minnesota, and Mankato, Minnesota. Let's start with a quarterback. Kilzer, transfer from Air Force, never played for Air Force, actually never even enrolled in Air Force because he enrolled at the Prep Academy, and we can get into that as well. But he's going to fill that hole in the Bison recruiting process for a quarterback. They did not sign a quarterback during the early signing period because their guy bailed, went to Northwestern with David Braun. This fills that hole to have a quarterback in this cycle.
Yeah, and I think Tim Polisic, new head coach, has said in a perfect world, they want 5 quarterbacks on roster, 4 on scholarship, 1 as a walk-on type player. Obviously, you have veterans like Cam Miller and Cole Payton at the top, of the food chain as far as the quarterbacks go. But this kid's from Maple Grove. I think as you and Dom reported, he was at NDSU's camp, so he's been on the radar.
He was actually offered by NDSU
so it's not like
years ago.
This came out of nowhere. Now, a lot of times when you see these transfers, there's some sort of connection or schools have recruited the kid in the past. So, like you said, there's a need because I don't know. You can't have too many quarterbacks because there are roster limits, but you definitely want to have a full stable of quarterbacks and spread out the grades a little bit because with Cam's a 6th-year quarterback now, Cole Payton's a 4th-year quarterback. So I think NDSU is thinking they need to fill in some of the younger grades.
They're looking for the future, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know if this young man is the future or not, but. I will say he's 6'3", 195 pounds right now. I assume he might add a little bit of weight. So if you get up around 6'3", 200 pounds, that's actually bigger than Cam Miller. Cam's about 6'1".
I think they list him like at 6'2", 210, 215 pounds.
So this kid could add some weight and be just kind of a bigger version maybe of Cam Miller in terms of physical stature. But at Maple Grove High School, he was a dual threat quarterback. He told me this morning when I talked to him that he actually threw more his junior year. And then
Cam Miller 6'1", by the way. I was off. 6'1",
okay,
214.
6'1". Okay,
right.
so
Gotcha.
and Cam is a thick kid. He's not tall, but he's a thick, heavy kid. But this Kilzer kid told me this morning that he threw more his junior year. Then in a weird twist that we can get into as well, he ended up injuring both his shoulders, had torn labrums in both his shoulders. And so he said his senior year at Maple Grove, when the Crimson went 13-0 and won the Minnesota 6A, that's the biggest class in the state, won the 6A title, he actually became more of a running quarterback because his right shoulder was injured and he couldn't throw as well. And so he kind of became that dual threat guy. He said he went to Air Force. He thought that was the right opportunity for him. They run the option. They did under Troy Calhoun. That's what Air Force is famous for. Went out there thinking he was going to be an option quarterback. With his injuries, the Air Force Academy said, well, we don't want to put you through basic training at the actual Air Force Academy, so why don't you enroll in the Air Force Prep, which is a prep school in Colorado Springs. You can spend a year there rehabbing and getting healthy. Then you can enroll in the Air Force Academy, go through basic, become part of the football program, and do all that stuff. So this Kilzer actually, his clock hasn't started running yet on college eligibility. So he has 4 years of playing left, plus a redshirt year. So he has 5 years. And I think that's probably attractive to NDSU as well, just because they can have him for... He's not a kid who's going to come in for 2 years or 1 year. And so there's some potential there.
So he's basically a true freshman.
He's a freshman,
true freshman, a year older by normal standards because he spent year prep school. And I think the size is what NDSU likes. I'm sure the athleticism. Now, as you brought up, the question is, how with the shoulder injuries, can he get back to throwing the ball?
He says he's throwing the ball again. Yep. He says he's fully healed, fully healthy. He said, and I guess I trust that. I'm not going to,
But beyond that, like the health part is one thing, but can he throw it well enough to develop into a starter one day? It's one thing being able to throw the ball, but to throw it accurately, run the offense, I'm sure that's the question with them because physically he seems to have a lot of the tools that NDSU likes in a quarterback, especially the dual threats part.
Yep, that's right. That fits what NDSU wants in a quarterback. Is they've always, from Brock Jensen on, during this run that they've always had the dual threat. They just don't like the drop back I don't mean to pick on Zeb Noland, but Zeb Noland did not fit what NDSU wanted in a quarterback. Big arm, experience at Iowa State that he had, but he just wasn't the guy that could move around. And the NDSU doesn't actually just want a guy who can move around. They want a guy who can run. They want to pick up yards.
Well, and I think that's just becoming a trend in all of football, college football especially. I mean, there's not many just pure pocket passers left in all of college football, at least the top guys. And if you are, you better be surgical from the pocket, because if you can't run at quarterback these days,
even in the NFL,
I mean,
Kirk Cousins is like a throwback that he can't run. I mean, even Brock Purdy of the 49ers isn't known as a dual threat quarterback, but even he took off in the NFC Championship game and got huge yards.
I mean, you look at all the top guys: Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes when he wants to run, can run. Joe Burrow, maybe a lesser extent, but he reminds you a little bit of Purdy. You don't think he can run, and all of a sudden he'll rip off 20 yards. So dual threat's kind of the way all of college.
And that's one of the reasons why the Niners traded up and gave up so much for Trey Lance, is they thought he could be a dual threat Patrick Mahomes type quarterback. Didn't turn out that way, but that's even the NFL teams see that as a benefit, is to have those guys that can do multiple things. Kilzer, now I think this is important, and we hear from South Dakota State how, well, we're not after the kids who are being offered by everybody else. We're developing our own guys. It does matter to me, though, and I think it matters to a lot of schools, that some of these kids are being offered by multitudes of other programs, because what it tells you is that other schools at NDSU's level or higher also see these kids as potential players for them. So Kilzer's offers in high school were NDSU, Air Force, of course, Army, Kent State, Ohio, South Dakota, and St. Thomas. And he told me this morning that the Minnesota Gophers, offered him a preferred walk-on as well. And so Kent State and Ohio are from the MAC, and that's a conference that NDSU regularly recruits against. Air Force is from the Mountain West, another conference NDSU regularly recruits against. Army is also an FBS school, just got added to the AAC, I believe, right?
I believe, it's so hard to keep track of some of this stuff. But
South Dakota is obviously a Missouri Valley Conference school, and then St. Thomas is the Pioneer League, and that's a natural one because it's located in the Twin Cities. But the point is that Kilzer's not some kid who, was it Trey Drake, the kid out of New York? And nothing against him, never seen him play, but he was a kid maybe who was more under the radar, being from Western New York, just not a hotbed. Kilzer's been offered by MAC schools, Mountain West schools, and Valley schools.
Army will be joining the AAC in 2024. Which
they're the team that I was trying to get NDSU into the AAC when I was talking to the commissioner, and then he's like, okay, and then 6 months later he takes Army instead. So whatever.
Shows nobody listens to you. But
well, it starts at home. Yep.
Yeah, and I back to your recruiting point, yes, you have to unearth gems, you have to find hidden, under-recruited kids, but at some point, your whole class can't be those type of kids.
No.
You still need, and South Dakota State, they get guys recruited by the whole Valley. They get those type of kids too, but so yes, I think. But
they're crafting their brand, they're crafting their identity to be, we find hidden gems.
Well, NDSU's done
Everybody
pretty well
does too.
In the walk-on market. UND's done well. No, all these schools have their walk-on success stories. Obviously, some more than others. But to your point, it shows you the level of prospect. And again, once a prospect gets in a program, 3, 4, 5 stars at some point don't really matter much anymore, but it does show you the level of recruit they're getting, because talent does matter, and these other schools showing interest shows there's something about this kid that they like, whether it's his physical traits, his ability to play, whether he's got moxie or some intangibles. There's stuff there that other schools are seeing as well.
What do we think of the offensive lineman from Marshall, Trent Fraley? Now, both Kilzer and Fraley have been on campus, enrolled for spring semester, so they're working out with the team. They'll participate in spring ball. But I think Kilzer's a kid for the future. Obviously, NDSU has 2 quarterbacks now that they're going to have to figure out what they want to do with them this upcoming season with the new offensive coordinator, Jake Landry, which we'll get to in a moment. But I think this Trent Fraley kid, again, I've only seen the little 24/7 or 247 clips of him, all that stuff. But I think he's an underrated guy and could potentially play a role. And I think maybe NDSU needs him to maybe play a role this spring and fall just because of what NDSU has lost on the offensive line. And I think you and I agree that their offensive line is not often an area that NDSU needs to worry about. And maybe I'm ringing the alarm bells. Maybe I'm just being negative Nelly guy here. But I think there are some questions on the offensive line. And maybe if Fraley can contribute, that would be a huge thing for the Bison.
I don't know. Maybe I think it's about as many question marks in NDSU's offensive line has had in years going into the season.
Yep.
It always seems, and they do have Gray Zabel and Mason Miller. They're 2 fine building blocks. Gray Zabel could be an NFL draft pick next year. But at some point, when you lose Dylan Radins, Cordell Volson, Cody Mauk, Nash Jensen, Jalen Sundell, and like a Jake Kubis in such a such span. If you don't hit on these guys coming up, there could be some growing pains. And
they also had some guys leave. They also had some transfers, and I think that has hurt their depth as well. Yeah. NDSU.
I think. Well, we'll start there. Gray Zabel coming back was huge because if he had left in the portal and taken some of the NIL offers he had on the table, then NDSU would really be in a bind in the offensive line because I think I'm guessing they'll either play him left or right tackle. We'll see. Does Mason Miller move back out to tackle? They keep him at guard. Jake Rock, Hunter Pontius are some veteran guys. I know they have some younger guys like Bo Johnson, Jack Lewinsky. The other guy escapes. Is it Griffin Empey?
Yep.
So they have some young guys they like.
But those are all redshirt freshmen.
Yeah. So those, an offensive line is harder to play earlier, so it might be a little bit too quick to get those guys in there. But to your point, I think that's why Fraley may need to be their starting center. I mean, or at least compete for that spot.
You're right. I don't know if he's anywhere near good enough so I'm not going to say that he needs to be their starting center. I think he needs to compete for a spot and at least be on the depth chart somewhere. One of the knocks on Matt Entz the last couple of years, I think, the former coach, is that the transfers he brought in didn't really contribute very much. And I know it's really hard in the offensive line. The offensive line, everybody wants those guys. If you have...
it's almost like quarterback. In the college era, I mean... They're almost as valued as much as quarterbacks on the open market or whatever you want to call it.
The difference is that at the FBS level, the quarterbacks all just kind of change teams, right? They're all just swap teams. At FCS, I mean, these guys, the big Power 5 schools are coming down into the FCS and plucking these kids out of UND, out of, potentially could have been NDSU. If you're an offensive lineman, I mean, the kid from UND who wasn't even playing, Braden Bryant, ended up going to San Diego State. That's really good and good for him. But wow, he wasn't even in the lineup at UND.
That's my point. It's almost like you said, like FCS quarterbacks. I mean, don't get me wrong, a bunch of them moved up, but offensive linemen seem to get plucked at a higher rate. So that's why it's almost, in some ways, a more valuable commodity than quarterbacks at this level.
And so I guess my point is Fraley, again, never seen the kid play. We'll see him in spring practice for the first time with our own eyes. I just think that he needs to compete for a spot. And maybe they do put him at center because they need a center. But it's so hard if you're going to start trying to find starters on the offensive line out of the transfer portal is not the way to go about building an offensive line at the highest levels of FCS.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think NDSU has done okay in the transfer portal in the non-offensive lineman spots. I know they brought in Luke LaSalento, who was just a
depth guy,
backup. I can't. The name escapes me. The Iowa Missouri transfer they had from last year.
Isaac Satechka.
Yeah, but getting back to your point a little off. They have gotten guys like Braden Thomas, Tamarick Williams, Hunter Zenzen is yet to be seen, but they have plucked, some players here and there in the portal in recent history. But to your point, offensive linemen are just hard to find. And if you have a good one, don't let them go because
nope. Which is why the green and the gold collective is rocking and rolling now, and that's a whole different topic for a different day. But we'll see. The other two signees are a couple of walk-on, one an offensive lineman, one a defensive lineman. Jack Hansen from Eagan, Minnesota on the defensive line, and Gage Schmidt from North Mankato on the offensive line. Good size, good frames, as we like to say in the business. But those are two kids who, if we hear from those two kids in the next 2 or 3 years, things are not going well at NDSU, quite frankly, unless they're just absolutely knock out the world outstanding as walk-ons.
Not necessarily. Joe Haig was a walk-on, and his second year in the program, he started.
Okay.
But to get back to...
Do you think that's a common occurrence, or do you think that's a once-in-a-generation occurrence?
I'm not saying it's common, but if one of them are playing, it could also be because they have found a gem. Not necessarily because things are going bad. But it's probably likely it's not a good sign.
All right.
I'm just saying not ultimately. But Jack Hansen, 6'4", 255-pound defensive tackle. He actually, I think both his parents went to NDSU. So he said he's followed NDSU since he was a kid. So this was kind of one of the schools he wanted to go to. I think in the past we've seen guys like Brian Schatz. There's been a number of walk-on defensive linemen who've developed. I think they want him to play defensive tackle, so I'm sure they're going to try to get him to 280, 290 pounds. And we're just talking offensive linemen. I mean, Gage Schmidt, 6'3", 285. You can never have too many offensive linemen. It just gives you a chance to, I don't know if a free lottery ticket, but a free scratch-off here. And if this kid develops into something, then you got, whether it's a key depth guy down the road, or if he eventually is good enough to ascend to a starter. So, and you look at the run NDSU had, and you look at the run that South Dakota State seems to be starting. Where are those teams good? Offensive and defensive line. We can talk about quarterbacks, skill positions,
talk about Christian Watts and Trey Lance, really important players.
Yes.
But where NDSU won all those championships in the end was up front in the trenches. They just kicked the snot out of everybody up front for 12 years or whatever it was.
So
let's move on to what we attended yesterday, which was a press conference introducing 3 new assistant coaches to new head coach Tim Polisek's staff. None of them, there was no breaking news there. Jake Landry is the offensive coordinator, the new one replacing Tyler Roll. Tom Miller out of Grand Forks broke that story, seems like 7 months ago. It was like a week ago, probably. Devin Kleiman, a familiar name, the son of former NDSU head coach Chris Kleiman, who is now at Kansas State. Devin will be the safeties coach, an important position coach for this upcoming year. And Will Johnson will be quarterbacks coach, another important position for the Bison, because they have some holes to fill there as well. I don't know that there's anything earth-shattering out of the press conference yesterday. You wrote about it. I was there kind of asking some questions. What was your main takeaway from that? There
was breaking news. We found out Jeff Phelps is leaving the program to take another job. So
that's true.
So they need to find a defensive line coach.
Yes, correct. Yep. And also, he's also going to fill
Ian Dino.
Tim Polasek, as the head coach, is going to fill the director of player personnel and recruiting, or whatever the title is, that was left open by Ian Dino, Matt Entz's right-hand man, who was never more than 2 steps away. Ian went to Northwestern to work for David Braun in a similar capacity. And so Polasek said yesterday that
Zach Peters is going to be in consider.
I was going to say tall blonde kid, but Zach Peters,
he was an assistant in. I think he was one of the assistants in under under Ian Dino's
yes.
umbrella, so he's kind of worked in that realm. So nothing's been for sure, but it sounds like he's going to get good, heavy consideration to possibly replace Ian's position.
Aside from those things, what did you take away from the 3 new coaches and what they had to say?
Jake Landry, I think most fans are probably thinking, what's this NDSU's offense going to look like? Is it going to be different? Is it going to drastically change it? I think we found the answer is no. Tim Polisic said Northern Illinois basically ran these same sets. Obviously, he's going to put his wrinkles in. He said, we're going to look at what we do. We're going to see what's good, what's bad, what we need to add, what we may need to subtract. But, and we've reported this, but, Tim Polisic and Jake Landry have apparently been great friends, or really good friends for a decade.
For a decade, yep.
I mean, maybe that's some of the inside stuff that most people don't know. Jake Landry's going to call the plays. Not that we knew if that was...
Well, I think people wondered with Polisic, his background being an offensive guy and a former offensive coordinator both here and at Wyoming, I think people wondered how much of a stamp was he going to put on the offense, and was he going to call plays? I know you can do it. I don't know that you would want to do it. Obviously, a stamp is going to be on the program. I just don't know that you want to call the plays as the head coach.
It seems like that can work at the pro level. Guys like Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan do it. But college is different. You're
Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah. College is just a different thing. It just doesn't seem to work at the college level. I don't know why. Maybe it's because you have so much other stuff you're in charge on. You're more of the face of a program, a salesman, as compared to those guys. I mean, Andy Reid doesn't have to go out and pump up, Kansas City football around,
right.
But and then the other thing, he did make a note that Dan Larson, which is he's the running backs coach now.
He was the offensive line coach.
But he said Dan Larson and Randy Hedberg will also be involved in game planning. So it is going to be somewhat of a collaborative effort. But he goes, in the end, the offense is going to be seen through the offensive coordinator's eyes, and more importantly, the quarterback's eyes.
Yes.
Those are two things he was very specific about. So,
well, that was interesting. And if you listen to what Polisic and Landry had to say, they both sort of said, well, we need to figure out, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I'm paraphrasing, we need to figure out what the quarterbacks can do and what they're best at, I think is what they phrased it, and sort of mold the offense there. And I don't know if that's a change necessarily, but I thought that both Polisic and Landry sort of saying that was interesting to me, because you wonder then, what does that mean something? Football coaches always talk in code, and we learned this in the media, being in it for so long, that publicly football coaches often say things that you have to sort of decipher, and they're not just going to come out and say, we're gonna come up with a special set of plays just for Cole Payton, where he's going to do A, B, C, and D. But I wonder if by saying what they were saying, we need to find out what the quarterbacks do best, if that wasn't sort of a hint that something more might be coming. I don't know. I'm totally speculating.
I don't know. To me, I more read it like the quarterback's going to influence the game plan and play calling, because the quarterback's on the field and probably knows just as much or more than coaches in the heat of battle. Or he knows, or the quarterback is going to know what works, what doesn't work, or what he's comfortable. I think, too, it's what he's comfortable with. I think there's, Jake Landry as a coordinator can call 7 plays that he loves and it'll probably work, but if the quarterback's not comfortable running those plays, why you don't call them, even though they might be the right play call. So I think the point is, we have to do stuff that the quarterback can do and are comfortable doing. So I don't know.
No, that's fine. I mean, you might be right. I might be right.
Yeah,
Neither of us might be right.
Yeah.
It might be a blend of.
Yeah, exactly. So
I just sense that Cole Payton, I'm not going to say has been underutilized, but just I've talked with Polisic a couple of times, and just the name Cole Payton keeps coming up a lot when I talk to the head coach. And so you can read into that what you want. And Matt Entz was also, and Tyler Roll were also incredibly high on Cole Payton. But it's just, there's almost like this, when I talk to Polsek, it's almost like this, my God, this kid is unbelievable. He's huge.
He's very tricky because you want to get this kid on the field more, because we've seen in the open field when he puts on the jets, he's like a runaway freight train.
Yep.
I mean, he literally, he's got like Trey Lance's open field ability in running. When he hits the gas,
except he's as big as a tight end though.
But Trey Lance was probably as big as a tight end.
Well,
as
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
When he hits the gas, nobody's catching him. And look, to your point, can he be used as a H-back, tight end, that? You think about that. But at the same time, he's your backup quarterback. And then do you risk getting him hurt, then all of a sudden Cam Miller gets hurt, and then you're down to your third? The fact that he's still the backup quarterback, I think it makes it tricky. If you just like full-on move to a position and he can maybe, like James Hendricks, and then occasionally come back to quarterback, and you had a more established number 2 behind Cam Miller, then you could probably do a lot of fun things with Cole Payton.
Yeah.
But I think with him being still the backup quarterback, there's still like...
Yeah, we'll see. I know what you're saying, and that perfectly makes sense, that you can't take a risk on your backup quarterback who's so valuable getting hurt. Running a play. I think back to the play against James Madison in the FCS semifinals at the Fargo Dome when it was like a trick play, and they ran Quincy out and they threw a pass to him and he dropped it. It would have been a touchdown, but he dropped it. Quincy Patterson, if he had come back to NDSU, they were going to do all kinds of things with him. They were going to split him out. They were going to run him tight end. They were going to do H-back stuff. He ended up going to Temple, which, he probably regrets to this day, but I don't know that. But I kind of look back at that and go, I mean, could there be some stuff for Cole Payton like that? But your point is well made that, I mean, as a backup quarterback, do you want to get him hurt?
But that year, you'd had Cole Payton, Quincy Patterson, and Cam Miller.
That's true, yes. So Quincy might have been the third quarterback that year.
Then you could do whatever not that you want anyone to get hurt, but you had more of a, then you had 3
you had
guys.
A cushion there.
Yeah, you had more of a cushion.
There.
So
that makes sense.
But I do sense, like you said, when we've talked to Tim Polisic about Cole Payton, you can almost like see the gears turning in his head, like his offensive mind, like
what can I do with this kid?
Like, this kid's like a weapon. Like we can do a lot of things with this kid. So it'll be interesting to see if that's a new wrinkle we see. Maybe we see more Cole Payton. Maybe we see him on the field more with Cam Miller. I mean, they were on the field together multiple times this year. Does that happen more often?
I think one of the frustrating things for Bison fans, and even some of us in the media, was Tyler Roll used Cole Payton effectively. And I'm sure that Tyler Roll probably tossed and turned in bed at night thinking, my God, what can I do with this kid? Still having some of the same reservations that you have voiced today. But I think one of the frustrations for fans is that every time Cole Payton came on the field and lined up in the shotgun, you knew exactly what was coming. Now, could the other team stop it? Or were there wrinkles maybe that our amateur eyes didn't pick up? And clearly they were looking for certain looks when they ran certain plays with Payton, but you just kind of wonder, is there more that you could do with him in terms of just creativity?
He did throw the ball a little more this year. It is funny, so so people, if Cole Payton comes in the game and rips off an 80-yard run like he did a few times, there's no complaints.
Correct.
If he comes in the game and gets stuffed, if the defense knew he was going to run, what's going on? And if he comes in the game, like against South Dakota State in the red zone and throws an interception, why are they getting so cute? Cole Payton's a runaway freight train. Don't throw the ball. So I'm just saying
that's football fans. And that's media.
Yeah, exactly. But what I'm saying, the result is always how you feel about how he's used. If the play works, awesome. If it doesn't work, horrible. But we did see a lot more of his throwing this year, especially earlier in the year. As the year went on, it was more like when he came in, he was running, and in the playoffs, he had some pretty good moments.
Yes, yes,
a lot of good moments.
Yes, a lot of good moments. Yep.
But,
you're right.
But I get your point, though. It's not like he's an actual quarterback coming in running. So to your point, it's like just seems like maybe there is more opportunities to throw the ball, especially I'm guessing when he comes in the game, there's 8 or 9 guys in the box.
Yeah,
would be my guess.
Yep.
So maybe that's something gets expanded with his game when he comes in next season. He throws the ball a little bit more.
We will see. It's one of the, as always, there's all kinds of, I don't want to say drama with NDSU, although there's intrigue maybe, a lot of intrigue. Especially this spring and fall, there's, because of the coaching change and I think a fairly high number of coaches turning over, it's sort of like a new, there's holdovers like the Nick Gazers and the Dan Larsons, but there's also the new guys who we met yesterday and the new head coach, and so it's almost like it's not a full turnover, but it's sort of a breath of, I don't want to say breath of fresh air because I don't want to. Ants did a great job. Tyler Roll did a great job. I don't want to insult them, but they're just new blood. Just new blood.
Yeah,
and I think that's good. Yeah. I think that's a good thing.
And okay, so you said what also stood out about the press conference. I can't remember how the question was phrased about hiring or what kind of coach you like to hire. And Polasek said, I'm not going to name names, but we could have went out and got a guy who potentially was at like a Power 5 school making a few $100,000 a year and brought him in. But he basically, long story short, he'd rather get the ascending, quick, fast riser guy than the guy who's been at a Power 5 guy. He goes. I tend not. He wouldn't go get a guy like. He goes. I tend to lean towards. Right. Jake Landry's been at Northern Illinois and Temple. It's not like he's been anywhere.
But this will not be his last stop, we would assume.
Yeah. And then Devin Kleiman and Will
Johnson.
This
will not be his last stop.
Yes. And position coaches, especially at the FCS level, and we've talked about this, you're going to have to go young. The position and assistant coaches at the FBS level are making so much money now, you're just not going to get many drop-downs to coach safeties or quarterbacks.
No, and Craig Bohl did that early on because that's, I think, what he felt he needed to do was to get some experience and get some guys. And then that sort of faded away even toward the end of Bohl's tenure, was he had the ascending guys more than the retreads.
And Will Johnson, I think, is an intriguing guy. He has coached at the Power 5 as a graduate assistant, but he's been in Oklahoma, he's been at USC, and the way Tim Polasek phrased it, he wanted to challenge himself. It's great going into those places, getting 4- and 5-star prospects and trying to coach them. Yeah. He said he wants a chance to coach in a developmental program and see if he can take a no-star, 1-star, 2-star kid and turn him into like an All-American type or a good player. So I found that kind of interesting, and that's what kind of sold Polasek on Will Johnson, among other things. He had connections to Jamar Cain. Other coaches that Polasek respected gave pretty good reviews of Will Johnson.
We should have asked. We didn't do this. I wonder what Will Johnson's recruiting area is going to be.
Yeah, we didn't. That was the one thing we could have asked.
Because I think that's going to be interesting is the way that Polasek talked about Will Johnson was that this kid he's a young guy. He's a rising star. Like he's not going to be here more than a couple of years. That's kind of what he didn't say it outright, but I think Polasek sort of hinted, well, we'll see. But this kid's a rising star who's been at USC. He's been at Oklahoma. And part of the developmental thing maybe for him is, can he get out on the road and recruit and, maybe bring some kids in who you're not going to beat the Big Ten schools. You're not going to beat the Big 12 schools. But if you're competing against the Air Forces and the MAC schools like they have in the past, can you get some of those kids to say, you know what, I don't want to go to Northern Illinois. I'd rather go to North Dakota State. And I'm curious to see how he recruits and some of the kids that he can bring in.
Although he did said he had I'm sure he doesn't think Will Johnson's going to be here for 10 years, but he also said, I made sure that he's committed to coming here and wants to be part of this program. And Will said what also sold him on NDSU is he feels it's still a I don't know what the word was, the camaraderie or like a
it's like an old school college football program.
Yeah, it's not
the transient thing like the highest levels of college football today are. You might turn over a roster every 2 years.
So he played at Oklahoma. Then he did 2 years as a grad assistant at Oklahoma. The same time Jamar Cain was there, former NDSU assistant defensive coach. Then he spent 2 years at USC. So I'm wondering, is more in around Kansas City, Oklahoma.
No, I think that's Devin Kleiman's territory.
Okay.
But I don't. We should have asked. We can at a later date.
And then Devin Kleiman, I guess we've kind of told this story before, but kind of he brought up, it's kind of full circle a little bit. His dad was the safeties coach or defensive back coach here in 2011. Now he's the safeties coach, so it's kind of a little, He
graduated from high school from Cheyenne, I believe.
Fargo Shanley.
That's right.
Fargo Shanley.
That's right.
Correct.
That's right. So he's a local guy. Everybody knows the Kleimans. Everybody loves the Kleimans. This is just a side note. It means nothing, but to me, as a soon-to-be 58-year-old man, Devin Kleiman looks like he's like 14 years old. He just looks so young to me. It just shows. Mostly, it just shows how old I am. But wow, Devin was sitting up there, and just going, "Wow, am I old? Holy cow!"
Maybe also when you probably are hanging around, he's a student manager, a ball boy. He's been around the program.
Right. I also saw him as a 8-year-old or whatever he was when he was hanging around Fargo. Let's spend just a few minutes to wrap up this pod. I have about 5 minutes left. I like to keep these at about 45 minutes. One of your beats at the Forum is Minnesota State University Moorhead. And one of the things going on over there this winter is the men's basketball team was ranked number 1 for a week early on when it was undefeated. Lost a couple of games, dropped down to 15, I think, then went up to 12. Now is back in the top 10 at number 9. The Dragons are legit, Eric, under second-year head coach Tim Bergstrasser. They've been legit for a lot of years. They've been legit since about 2011 when Chad Walfall got things rocking and rolling over there. But what's your take on the idea that the Dragons can get to the national tournament and possibly go a ways in the national tournament this year?
I think they can, but I think they might also think there's a potential to lose out early. And why I say that is you just look at the NSIC as just one little thumbnail of Division II basketball now. I just think there's a lot of teams that are similar. Mankato, the Dragons and Mankato are pretty close. I mean, and even
Minot State's really good.
Yeah, and even going 19-3. The Dragons won a lot of close games. I mean, they could be 17-5, and conversely, they could be 20-1. But I think the biggest thing, if they are to make a run, I think they got to get healthy again, and that's been when they were number 1. Soon after that, Gabe Myron broke his hand in practice, out for the year. He's
really good defender.
Yeah, a two-way player, 9 points a game, probably their best wing defender, 6'3", big guard. Hard to find those type of guys. Then more recently, Jameer Price, who was starting and their second leading scorer, had a concussion.
Transfer from Cleveland State.
Cleveland State, yes. So he's been out the last 4 games. They're hopeful. They play Minot State, by the way, on Thursday night. Number 15 versus number 9 in the Division II. They're hopeful to get him back, but he's missed the last 4 games with concussion. It's a long way of saying right now they basically have, let me get this right, 8 guys you can play. Because they had 10 usable players. They have 2 red shirts that Tim Bergstrasser is not going to pull the red shirts. So it's too late in the year. They're not going to waste a whole year on them.
Okay.
So they have 5 starters right now, 3 bench guys. They moved Jakir Sanchez into the starting lineup with Jameer Price out. He's done pretty well. He's scored 28 points in 2 of the last 3 games. But right now their bench is basically Eddie Beninga, Owen Heckner, who've done well but they're developing, and then Will Kinsey, who's Logan Kinsey's twin brother, who's now starting to see...
Logan's a starter as well.
Logan is a starter. Will is... I think they view him as more, they're still developing. They like he plays hard. He's a good defender, can hit an open shot, but now he's going to have to see more time. But if they can get Jameer Price back, get back to more 8-9 guys, I think they'll feel better. But I just think they need to get healthy, because if you don't have everything, and that all said, they went down to Mankato, and Mankato was ranked high, and they're right there on the road without Jameer Price, without Gabe Myron. Gabe Myron is likely not coming back. He's had hand surgery, and they didn't want to say for sure he's out, but he's not coming back this year.
I've talked to a number of people around the league, not just in Moorhead, but kind of the theme I would say that I've picked up on is The Dragons are a really good team. I don't think anybody sees them as a great team. I think the same is being said about Mankato, that they're really good, like a high-end NSIC team, but not a dominant team that's going to, just roll people over. And Minot's kind of the same way, that, athletic, they got some players, but they're just, it's maybe a little bit akin to the Summit League at Division I, that there's just no dominant team. I think at their level, the Dragons, Mankato, and Minot probably have a better chance of advancing farther than the top Summit League teams do, obviously. But there's just no team that's going to separate itself in the NSIC. They could go, the winner, and they all could get to the regional, I guess, and they all could win a couple of games at the regional and move on. I just don't think even the people in the league involved with those schools see them as maybe teams that are going to get to the championship game or the semifinal. But you never know.
But that said, they're going to be higher ranked in the region. You get to the Elite Eight, you get a right matchup in the first round of the Elite Eight, or you just shoot the lights out. All of a sudden you're in the Final Four. So it's just. But maybe that's what all of Division II basketball is right now. Maybe in general.
I don't know.
No. I'm just because when I look at it, some of these Augie teams that had like Daniel Jansen and Cody Schilling, or the Dragons teams that had Jake Reaver and Isaac Sievely, some of the more recent Northern State teams that had like Parker Fox and some of these guys. I don't see teams like that, but I think the league is more balanced. I don't think there's as many quote-unquote layups in the league. I think most teams, if you come out and you don't play well, I think 1 through 10 is pretty solid. There's a couple teams at the bottom that struggle.
Crookston and Concordia St. Paul and schools like that.
But Concordia St. Paul, before Jordan Horton got hurt, was a dangerous team.
True. Yep.
They had. You saw them. They had some guys who could do some things. Without Jordan Horton, the Dragons, that wasn't an easy. They had to battle their way through that.
And it's almost. I wonder if that's what Division II basketball is going to be going forward in the transfer portal era. And that's everything always comes back to that, because I also cover the Summit League, and I've seen a bunch of those games, and I've seen a bunch of Dragons games this year as well. And the theme in the Summit League this year, the league in which NDSU, South Dakota State, UND, South Dakota are in, is there's no dominant team, but it's better top to bottom, or at least it's more equal top to bottom. Yes. That there's no, like USD played South Dakota State, the first place team, to like a 4-point game in Brookings the other night. North Dakota State, the 8th place team in the 9-team league, beat South Dakota State down in Brookings. NDSU took UND to the wire up in Grand Forks last weekend, and so everything's kind of flattened out.
Well, and here's why it's flattened out. Grant Nelson's is Alabama. Max Asmus is at Texas.
Baylor Shireman a couple of years ago was at Creighton. Yep.
South Dakota State was able to keep Zeke Mayo this year, which was a guy we thought could be on the move. I would bet if I had to bet you one of these beef sticks I'm eating here during our podcast, I'd bet you that he's going to be gone after this year. So maybe it's still early, but long term, I just don't know if there's ever going to be like a great Summit League team anymore. Because if you get like a dude, like a Ben Woodside,
Grant Nelson,
a Nate Wolters, a Grant Nelson, some of those NDSU teams, Lawrence Alexander. Those teams have been picked over.
Correct.
Unless the collective really gets rolling here at NDSU, I just think that's the problem with the Summit. Now you can go, you can find a guy, you can find a gem, develop him, and all of a sudden Duke's like, or Alabama, Grant Nelson, come here, man.
I got $600K for you, Grant.
Yeah, we need a 6'11" power forward who can shoot some threes, throw down some dunks.
Defense.
Yeah. So, that's going to be the problem. And I think that's maybe what's hurt. NSIC is in a different stratosphere, but I think what maybe has hurt the NSIC in the past, if a Division I guy transferred, he could drop down to Division II without sitting out. So I think that gave him a chance of getting a little bit better Division II guy. Now a Division I guy can just go to another Division I school instead of...
Good point.
Because I think Mankato in the past has gotten guys who are like at South Dakota State or whatever, that maybe if it was no portal era, they would have went to another Division I program. So that's another thing where the transfers that the Division II guys are getting. Now, NDSU still, I mean, the Dragons still got a Cleveland State guy, but I just think the chance to get a little bit better Division I guy just because he doesn't want to sit out a year is kind of out the window.
Fair enough. All right, Eric, I got to wrap it up. Thank you.
All right.
As always, good. Eric Peterson of The Forum. You can read his stuff at inforum.com. You can read my stuff at inforum.com. And if you've listened this long, here's what you should do. You should subscribe to the Forum. Subscribe to Inforum. You can always find deals, 99 cents for 6 months or whatever, just to get in the door. What you're going to find is you're going to love it and subscribe long term. Put it on the old auto pay and help support what we're trying to do locally here with independent journalism. This has been the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. We will see you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely.